tempo. Welcome everyone to the Lunch and Learn for March 29th. Presenting today are Butler County's Pam Dunham and Mark Schmidt. We'll be fielding questions at the end, so feel free to leave them in chat, and I'll leave you in their capable hands. All right.
Well, good afternoon. Pam Dunham at Butler County GIS, and many of you probably heard Mark and I speak at the Kansas Association of Mappers Conference last October. Some of you may have not. There was a tornado in Butler County and Sedgwick County in April of 2022. And, you know, prior to that point, I had attended many classes, presentations, and still it was an unknown of exactly what they were going to be asking for when we showed up at the EOC. You know, responding to the EOC was something that had always been on my bucket list. You know, the last 25 years, I kept thinking they're going to call. One of these days they're going to call. And, you know, that was pretty exciting, but it was also, you know, frightening and scary to show up somewhere and be put on the spot. The tornado occurred just after 8 on a Friday night. That call didn't come in to me until about 10:45, and I was an hour away. And so I arrived, you know, on site just right at about midnight. We were pretty lucky. You know, we had the skill set and the expertise, but we didn't have the experience. But one of the really great things was Wichita Fire was first on scene, and they had a really large, really nice EOC truck. And they had an individual on staff, Lane Pierman, which is an ArcGIS online user. So he had a project up and running with ArcGIS Online, and he already had an approximate tornado path in place. So when I arrived, he turned that project over to me and got me hooked up, you know, to the printer to print. And I was able to add in any of our REST services that I felt was necessary and begin printing out maps for that search and rescue. You know, we talk about what we can do in GIS here in Butler County, but until we really put something together and showed up at exercises and we've been able to provide input and data that's been useful in response, we really weren't taken seriously. And so we just wanted to share that experience, you know, with other users. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So I'll turn it over to Mark. He's GIS analyst here in Butler County. And Mark, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so I'm Mark Schmidt, GIS analyst at Butler County, and I didn't show up to the EOC until about 6 a.m. So Pam had already been doing a lot of work up until then, and then I arrived on scene, and then we started producing maps. So one of the things that we did after the event was we realized it seemed pretty chaotic to us. So we sat down after the event, just Pam and I, and we had our own individual after action review, and we talked it for several hours one afternoon, and then it extended into several days of adding things here and there of what went well, what didn't go well, what are some of the takeaways that we had from this. So let me switch the slides here. So we talked about some of our lessons learned. One of the big things that we talked about was having a pre-made data structure. When we arrived on scene, we didn't have anything pre-made. We didn't have any sort of data set. So when incident commanders and first responders were requesting maps from us, we needed data to put on the maps, but we didn't have that data. So we ended up having to make data from scratch on scene in the chaos of an emergency, while a lot of people are kind of breathing down our necks for maps. So one of the one of the things that we talked about was we needed to have a pre-made data structure. Another reason we decided that, or that was big on our lessons learned, was when we did make the data from scratch on site, we realized a little bit, a couple days down the road when we were doing some of the analysis stuff, was we realized that we didn't make it correctly. For example, I had made a bunch of fields, just text strings as the field type. And we realized, oh, we needed to actually run calculations on that. So probably should have been a numeric field. So we had to readjust the data, remake it, and repoint everything. And it just turned out to be kind of a big hassle, all because we didn't have that pre-made structure. One of the other lessons that we learned was that we kind of needed to have some pre-made map layouts. When we did arrive on scene, that was the biggest request from us, is the responders and incident commanders wanted to have printed out maps. So we were having to make maps from scratch, and that again was taking time that we could have been doing something else, and it just seemed to kind of bog us down for a little bit, just because there were so many requests for maps. So we talked about having these pre-made map layouts, that all that was required if an emergency were to happen again was, all we would have to do is point it to the correct location on the map and then print, and then that's it. To where we don't have to worry about adding layers in, adding all of the map elements in, making the map readable. All of that is already pre-made so that we don't have to do that. Another lesson that we learned was, at least for me, I didn't have the greatest familiarity with the incident command structure. So when I arrived on scene, I didn't know who was in charge. I didn't know who to relay information to. So one of the things that we've been talking about within Butler County, not just GIS, but our emergency planning committees and with our emergency managers, that organization-wide, there's a big push to take some incident command classes through FEMA. So at least for us, the big push is to at least have everyone that could respond in emergency to take the ICS 100 and ICS 700 courses through FEMA, which are free courses. They just have online modules. So I've been working on that. Pam has been working on that, so that in the event of a disaster, we all know kind of the general structure of how the emergency is going to be run. But the biggest lesson that we learned was we needed to have a pre-made operating procedure. During our internal after action review, we walked through minute by minute of what happened in the disaster, from the time of touchdown to 2 weeks after the event. So for example, like when the tornado touched down, Pam and I were texting back and forth to let each other know, hey, tornado, that we may have something, we may be called in, so kind of be prepared for that. And then in doing this, we came up with our own internal plan of what maps to use, what data to use, what to expect, and at what time.
And so that plan really came into play for me when a couple of weeks ago we were called for an exercise, And, you know, it's going to be a tabletop exercise. We really didn't know what the exercise was going to be about. We were just, you know, asked to arrive. Mark and I both went. We both took our laptops, you know, not knowing, you know, it's tabletop. And, you know, we got there, and as they announced that exercise, they said, okay, we're going to divide you and Mark up, and Mark, you're going to take this side of the room, and Pam, you're going to take this side of the room, and you're going to work with these groups as you work through the exercise. And I don't know about other, you know, directors and supervisors, but, you know, I know what's going on, but, you know, frankly, Mark does a lot of the hands-on work and the creation of this data. And it was in that moment I froze and thought, oh no, you know, they're separating me and I'm going to have to do it on my own. And this is kind of like a real live event. And I was able to take that Word document that we created and glance down through it and open up, you know, the Pro project, and open up the situational awareness viewer, and, you know, open up all of the data that I needed. And it just kind of brought on a calmness. You know, we were able to work through the scenarios, draw in the damage paths, you know, make that buffer, and provide instant feedback to them in our groups, whether it was in regards to approximate population, any kind of special needs or critical infrastructure that was in the damage path. And it was just really nice having that document to kind of take that initial panic out of it and just let your skill set take over.
Yeah, so that's the biggest lesson that we learned from this whole thing, is to have that pre-made operating procedure. So in doing that, that also sparked some conversation internally, that it was like, hey, we think it would be nice, it would have been nice in that event to already have kind of a data template of what all data sets that we needed, so that, because frankly, we didn't really know what to expect going into that. So that sparked that conversation. And so after going through the April 29th disaster, we discussed that we think it would be a good idea to kind of launch kind of a statewide, have these data templates available statewide. So part of that discussion was, we talked about the idea of having those data templates available to everyone, to anyone that would need it. So in the event of a disaster, they wouldn't have to make data from scratch, that it would already be put together to where it would take that stress away, to where you could focus on making maps, providing that data, providing what is asked for in a timely manner, to where you don't have to worry about making that data. When we were talking about this, we were thinking that this could be a similar product to the Next Gen 911 data set, to where all users, all counties, anyone that is maintaining emergency management data would be able to use these templates, that everybody's kind of on the same page, to where the thought was, again, if a disaster happened, you wouldn't have to worry about knowing what data to use. We reached out to the team at DASC because they are the authority for the next gen data set. We reached out for kind of their advice kind of throughout this idea, and they're very open to discussion, and they provided ideas on how to implement this. And we just opened up that discussion with them just so that we can maybe look at implementing this in the least obtrusive manner possible. By having kind of these data templates, there would have to be a discussion, of course, of what goes into these data sets. So like for us, we have our whole county split out into search zones, because that was one of the main things that was asked of us, was to produce search zone maps for our first responders, but also have streets and addresses in this data set as well, along with population data from the US Census, and then having critical infrastructure, special needs, that kind of data, which that was part of our discussion with the team at DASC of, we know that there's some critical infrastructure fields within the addressing layer already. So we're looking at kind of how to best implement this so that it can be used widely across the state. Another thing that we talked about, of course, is maps and dashboards. We had produced a dashboard that was used widely, from KDEM to other emergency managers across the state, for all of the data that we had been collecting and producing for the tornado. So having a set of dashboards and map templates, the idea was that if this was widely used and everybody was kind of on the same page, emergency managers would be able to know what to expect from GIS people. They wouldn't be surprised by what they saw. They would know kind of what to look for, what to expect from what we're making. We're also at Butler County evaluating several applications to incorporate into at least our EOC deployment. One of those is the Orion damage assessment tool, which is made by Futurity. I'm sure some of you have heard of this. It is our understanding that it has been mandated by the state of Kansas to use, and is kind of the main requirement to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement due to some of the pre-populating fields and forms with it. So we've reached out to KDEM for coordination and implementation and best practices of kind of how to implement this into our system. Another application that we're looking at is it's called SARCOP, and so it's a quick capture application that's used for search and rescue efforts for first responders, fire departments, law enforcement, whoever's out kind of doing those initial search and rescue operations. That's the application that we're evaluating, along with some local search and rescue options that we're just evaluating. So that, I forgot to switch the slide. So that kind of takes care of those data template slides. So now kind of moving on to the operating plan. This is where most of our discussion took place. At the very least, we thought that it would be helpful if there was some sort of statewide operations plan that, again, similar to the data templates, that would be available to everyone, so that in the event of an emergency, you would be able to access this operating plan and know what to do, what to expect, because it is a stressful time. People are requesting a lot from you, and one of the main things that kind of frustrated me was when I arrived on scene, it felt like it was kind of, I need maps and I needed them yesterday type of thing. And while we're trying our best to get everything produced. So that's where we were thinking, kind of, if it would be helpful to have kind of a statewide operating plan. This document would ideally have what data is needed during a disaster, and when to use it. So, and what maps to produce from it, and what tools to use. So it would have this document would also have a general timeline of what needs to be done during an emergency. So, like, for example, our plan it starts kind of when severe weather is forecasted. So, like, when a watch is issued for a severe thunderstorm, we go through a checklist of items. So one was like, we make sure all of our tools are up and running. We make sure everybody has access to it that needs it. And we make sure that we take our laptops home, because that was another lesson that we learned. I was an hour away, the tornado touched down, and I didn't have my laptop on me. So Pam had to stop by the courthouse and pick my laptop up for me. But having a written down plan just helps with that preparedness, to where even if you're stressed, you don't have to try to recall from memory, okay, what do I do now? If it's written down, you can refer to that and go from there. So some other things that we have in there, one of the first things that we've talked about at our exercises is getting the scope of the disaster figured out really quick. So that's one of our first items on our operating plan. And then getting the search area maps printed. And then the other thing is the media. They were hounding us for, well, how many houses were damaged? And so we had to do some quick analysis and all of that kind of step. We can't do the rest of that type of analysis without the initial damage area. So having that operating plan kind of walks you through what needs to be done and when. The operating plan would also ideally have kind of what tools that we use. So for us, Pam had mentioned that we have a situational awareness viewer that we use. That's where we map our initial damage area. That's where we have some initial statistics of, this is the possible affected population. These are the critical infrastructure buildings that have been affected or possibly affected. So kind of knowing what tool to use when, that's helpful as well. So the whole idea with that is that there would be a statewide plan in place for people that haven't been called in. And in addition, if mutual aid was needed, if everyone was on the same page, that would run seamlessly as well. Then people called in to help would be able to kind of just hop right in and know what to use, what tools are there, and there wouldn't be any issues with that. So for example, I know Pam and I had talked about the situational awareness viewer. Let me see if I can switch my screen here. All right. All right. So did that switch from the PowerPoint?
Yes, it did, Mark.
All right, cool. So this is kind of what we're talking about with these sorts of tools. This is what we've deployed within Butler County. So when we talk about creating a damage path, it's just as easy as just clicking some points on the map and then getting some of that general information. So with it, we can easily see affected population, affected critical infrastructure, hazardous materials, school buildings, and then property values. So kind of using this type of tool is what we have in our operating plan. Yeah, that's kind of the whole idea here. So I guess the questions that we're posing for this is there a need for a statewide kind of set of data templates for emergency response data sets? Another one is there a need for a statewide operating plan? So those questions are kind of why Pam and I have put on this lunch and learn, to kind of throw out the idea, get some initial feedback, and then see about moving forward with that if that's the general consensus that this is kind of the direction that we would want to go. Again, this was all just in discussion of what, after our experience with the tornado. Eileen, I see you posted a question here of where was your data stored, whether it was on laptops or on a server that we had to connect to. So the hosted features that we created were hosted on our enterprise, so on our internal servers. But then we also had like our address data and street data on external hard drives that we had taken.
So we were able to connect and add our REST services from our ArcGIS server to the ArcGIS online maps and utilize them. But we do have the backup external hard drives. So if we do not have connectivity, that we can still do everything we need to do.
Yeah, so for kind of moving forward, we were looking at kind of setting up some regular meetings to kind of iron out these ideas of putting together a data set, putting together an operating plan, because we have our own at Butler County, but that may not be helpful to other people. And there may be other ideas out there that we want to include. So we were kind of discussing that it would be a good idea to have a collaboration with a lot of different ideas, a lot of different people to get the best product out there. So we were hoping that this would be a group effort as well. And although we were using CAM as the platform today, we want to reach all people who would respond during an emergency. but aren't necessarily CAM members. So that we weren't going to be exclusively to CAM. So that was kind of the idea behind this. So this is, I guess, where we would like to hear some ideas, your thoughts, feedback, and kind of open that up for questions, answers, and stuff like that.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Eileen.
Hey.
Great summary and super interesting to understand. None of us like to show up and not be prepared. So anything that can help prepare for the unknown, or at least help guide in that initial response, I think would actually give us all some comfort in just knowing, okay, Butler County's been through it. Kind of, lay the land of, here's some guidelines or some recommendations just to have in place. And I think we actually, when we met with you before this, I think the most revealing was understanding the data layers that you uncovered that were needed and weren't necessarily aware of until the event happened. Like you said, you're having to make them on the fly and things like that. So I think even some of that real core, back in the Homeland Security days and stuff, we talked about what are the base data layers and what do you need? But I think that will be quite revealing through this coordination event, just understanding the, like you're saying, the who, what, when, where prep content for this. So I think it's a great initiative, and of course DASC is excited to be involved and can help in any which way that the direction of this group sees fit. So.
One of the other neat things that has kind of come out of this, a couple weeks ago, Mark and I were invited over to the McConnell Air Force Base, and their GIS team is also kind of looking at the same thing. They're on a complete different level, but they are really excited to understand, what data we have and what would be needed, because they have a couple of volunteers that live in Butler County that we could call on in an emergency. And the fact that, they could show up or sign in remotely and assist, having some type of plan and a structure would be very helpful.
I also see in the chat there's a link put to a FEMA resource. And I pull it up quickly. I haven't personally looked at this, so this is a new tool to me of that kind of looks at resilience analysis and kind of pre-planning. So yeah, I need to look at getting what's involved with this. So that's a.
Hi, I'm Darcy Paul. I'm the GIS specialist at the Kansas Forest Service. I've responded to a lot of wildfires. I can't speak to tornadoes, but wildfires, especially in Kansas and out west, where they have month-long incident management teams. I know you guys spoke a lot about tornadoes, but there is wildfire symbology is already set up, all that. We use that here with the Forest Service. Would be happy to share that with people. What we talk about at our state agency is not really having local staff do the GIS work, because you wouldn't be familiar with the symbology, the language, etc. A lot of that would be me doing it remote and then having access to plotters. So I guess a couple of my questions I would have is, first off, how many of these counties actually have GIS staff? Because it's kind of a moot point if we're in rural Kansas and there's no one there to do the GIS. How does that work? Like in Barber County, when we had Anderson Creek, I was plugged in and they kind of gave me access to their plotter and such. So that would be my first question, is like, how many counties actually have GIS resources that can respond? Another one would be, are you looking at creating a database for each kind of natural disaster? Or are you trying to create one for all the natural disasters or human caused disasters?
So I'll answer the second question with the database. Right now, it's being designed as kind of an all-inclusive sort of disaster, to where any disaster that pops up. So if I bring up this my situational awareness viewer here, if all sorts of incidents that we would be able to respond to, and that's the idea. That's the whole point, because of course, and I mean, not all disasters are tornadoes. That's just the popular one in Kansas, and that's what happened to us in Butler County. But so one of the exercises that we talked about, we did talk about grassland wildfire. So, and we were able to produce the maps and plot it all on using this system. So the idea is to have kind of an all-inclusive data set that would kind of cover all in my office here. But all of those are capable. They're just search and rescue using the kind of the FEMA waypoint data dictionary. So it doesn't matter what disaster happens, that sort of application can be used. As far as how many counties have GIS resources, I don't think I can speak to that. I know a lot of them do, but I don't have exact numbers.
This is Eileen again. I might be able to speak to that a bit. So I'd say as far as in-house across the state, you're probably only looking at 12 to 15 that have in-house GIS personnel that can really react quickly, to with a full set of GIS knowledge. There's a lot of counties use a vendor to maintain their data, whether it's 911 or appraiser. But I think with that in mind, having some sort of a guideline set up would help counties, either whether they go through a vendor to prepare this data, or at least have this data kind of collected and ready for an event that, whether DAS stores the data or the vendor responds and provides the data and doesn't work for them or something like that, even so we're prepared no matter where the support comes from, I guess is my point.
And I know here in Butler County, DASC and, different organizations from the state did reach out and offered, their services, but not having ever went through it, we really had no idea what to ask for. And, here they wanted some of that local data, on site and in the EOC. And so I think that, some of the thoughts of just a discussion of a statewide, some base expectations that would be met. And if you're utilizing ArcGIS Online and things, you could help those counties remotely. So you wouldn't have to be that GIS person in that team. And we are only talking about a base set, not an all-inclusive, not the complete analysis that maybe is done. And, that maybe the GIS professionals and state agencies, there's probably a lot of additional things that could be added. But the thought here was just some base expectations.
This is Chris, and one thing that I guess I, kind of, had thought about was the KDM map viewer, or whatever its technical name is, where we take the local data and we submit it to KDM for the county EOP. And if we're going to go through something like this, is there a possibility of trying to kill two birds with one stone when it comes to some of the data that is needed for the EOP mapper and the attributes that we're looking at developing, with the different critical data sets and stuff? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we would want this to be set up to where it's like, we're not making it harder for any other processes, to where we would want to make sure that we're thinking of all of that. So at least for me, the EOP, I didn't think of that until you had mentioned it when you had called the other day. So that's been on my mind a little bit, of how can we make sure that we're not making this harder for other systems.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea here. I think it's a good idea.
So I'm seeing some things in the chat here as well. The first one of some data layers from FEMA. Again, I haven't looked at this exactly, so thank you for putting that in the chat. I will save that. As far as the National Weather Service damage data, we did use that a little bit in some of our post processing, and we have that pulled into our system as well. But that generally doesn't come in until the next day. So it was helpful after that first day. So we were also looking at kind of getting a damage assessment, another one in addition to that National Weather Service damage layer as well. And that's where we were kind of trying to figure out and we were reaching out to KDM to figure out how to best implement the Orion damage assessment tool. And then if we would like to implement your data structure templates now, how could we get a copy of them? Ultimately, I would have to export it and send that. So I think that's ultimately what that answer would be for now. But again, that's where if that data structure works for us, it may not work for everybody. So that's where we're kind of throwing this out to a larger group to make sure that we get one that works for everybody, because I'm sure we've missed things, and I'm sure there's things to improve on it.
So I would say that we could send out an email to everybody who was registered to attend today and just ask them, if you would like to be part of this discussion of kind of finalizing at least some initial data structures and ideas. A few of the ideas had been thrown around. One of them, when we were discussing with DASC, we looked at maybe adding a field into address points that not a required, not a mandated, but maybe a field that you could identify your address points that are special needs or critical infrastructure. So we might be able to kill two birds with one stone on some of those things, to where it's not, another set, but then it's available statewide. But we can send out an email, ask for those that would like to be part of that discussion, or receive a copy. We definitely would like to learn here in Butler County as well. So, you know, just sharing what we've done is great, and we're always open to that, but we would like to learn and improve upon it as well. So it would be great if we had some feedback. We are in storm season, so I don't know if that produces, you know, some urgency. So we kind of wondered whether we wanted to talk, you know, again sooner rather than later.
Hey Pam, this is Chris again, and
Yeah, Chris.
I know the last time that we were a little late on updating our GIS data for the EOP, and I went through kind of utilizing, you know, the address points as the base starting point and different things. And what I found going through, you know, this last EOP update with the GIS data was we've got a lot of places that fall into the same, you know, or the same facilities used or designated as different things within the EOP and different things. So, you know, I actually tried to, you know, incorporate to some degree, you know, some of that EOP stuff within the address points, and it is a little bit more cumbersome than what I originally thought it might be.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. Currently, we have a separate layer for our special needs and then another layer for our critical infrastructure. We were just kind of tossing around some thoughts on, you know, how to make this all work. And I think that's going to be the real power of, you know, another just short discussion of, you know, taking these things kind of a step at a time and talk about them and, you know, get a data template and move forward.